Sup investors, it's the Russian dude. Imagine being Vladimir Putin in 2026 after building a system where every billionaire, minister, security official and governor depends on you personally. And then suddenly, the thing that you fear the most is not NATO, Ukraine, sanctions or even Donald Trump, but the possibility that someone from the elite class you created may decide that normal life requires removing you from the equation. According to the report discussed by the Financial Times, according to European intelligence sources, Putin has become increasingly worried since early 2026 about a possible attempt on his life by disgruntled members of the Russian ruling class using a drone. Very ironic if you ask me. And whether every detail is confirmed or not, his behavior now looks like a man being sealed inside his own fortress. Internet-connected devices are reportedly banned around him. Travel restrictions and destinations for him and his family, if he has any left, have been reduced significantly. His Moscow region and Valdai residences are allegedly no longer a part of the routine. He can spend weeks working from Krasnodar bunkers while Russian legacy media shows pre-recorded footage, and he has not visited any single military asset in 2026. And even the homes of cooks, photographers, security guards, just his support personnel are all under extra surveillance. Former Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu is reportedly being viewed as a potential destabilizing factor, which sounds meaningless until you remember that in Moscow, vague phrases often and most likely all the time describe very real fear. So today, we're not just asking whether Putin is personally scared, we're asking who benefits when the ruler of Russia starts believing that everyone around him is a huge threat. And by the way, another huge news that came recently is that Ukraine will finally get a massive boost to its air defense through highly anticipated and long-awaited Patriot systems. But as always, two different headlines can cover the exactly same story, but leave you with completely different expectations. Take this one, for example. One headline says, Trump says Ukraine will get license to produce Patriot missiles. Straight to the point, sounds like a breakthrough, like Ukraine is about to start building one of the world's most advanced air defense systems on its own. But then you scroll down a little bit further and see completely different, another headline. Lockheed Martin and Raytheon Technologies not thrilled with the idea to produce Patriot missiles in Ukraine. Now the exactly same story feels completely different. Instead of focusing on a political announcement, straight to the point one, the emphasis shifts to the companies that actually manufacture the system and the practical challenges of making that proposal happen. Same news, same day, but one headline focuses on what leaders are proposing, the other focuses on whether that proposal is even realistic. One is from the Western media, another one is from the Russian media, trying to dismiss Ukraine getting Patriots as something meaningful. This is exactly why I personally use ground news. Instead of seeing just one version of the same story, you can compare headlines side by side and instantly see how different outlets frame the very same event. Some emphasize political promises, others highlight the industrial and business realities behind those promises. Ground News also shows you how many outlets are covering the story and where those publications fall across different political spectrums, giving you the context to understand not just what is happening, but how different media organizations are choosing to tell their story. Because sometimes the biggest difference is not the facts, it is the angle you're shown first. And if you are short on time, also, Ground News can even summarize what each wing media, left, center or right, is talking about in regards to the very same story. So guys, if you want 40% off the Vantage plan, please scan this QR code you see on the screen or go to ground.news/RussianDude. And please subscribe. Helps the channel tremendously. Don't settle for just one headline, see the whole picture. Thanks so much Ground News for sponsoring this video. Now back to the program. Here's where it gets interesting because before the bunker story, we need to understand the political atmosphere around Putin. And there is no better example than the ceasefire game around Victory Day. And yes, I know that it happened 2 months ago, but that is an annual celebration, the biggest one for Putin. So everything said right now in today's video will be applicable next year, year after, and many years after. So yeah, Putin's regime has built a near religious attitude towards May 9th. Because Victory Day is not just a holiday in modern Russia, it is the emotional foundation of the state. The parade where the Kremlin tries to prove that it owns history, sacrifice, patriotism and the right to speak on behalf of the past. That is why Putin needs the parade to happen year after year, even if it is shortened or underrepresented, even though if it's just one tank on the Red Square, because Putin on the podium is the part of the regime's mythology. But Ukraine's current capabilities change the equation, because Kiev can make the Kremlin worry not only about military consequences, but also about political optics, where security people rush Putin away while alarms are heard and the celebration becomes a symbol of vulnerability. This is why Putin so badly needed a short pause around the holiday, and this is where Vladimir Zelensky made a clever political move. Last year, when Putin offered a 3-day ceasefire, Zelensky did not simply reject it. He proposed extending it to a 30-day truce, creating a logical trap, because if Moscow truly believed 3 days without escalation was possible, then just why not make it longer? Makes sense. This time the setup was more complicated, because Putin effectively tried to route the pressure through Donald Trump, hoping that if Ukraine said no, Trump would blame Kiev for rejecting a peace gesture. But Zelensky stepped out of that trap by declaring a unilateral ceasefire starting at 12 a.m. at midnight on Wednesday, May 6th, 2 days earlier than the period Putin wanted, meaning that Ukraine was not refusing a pause. It accepted it, it declared it, it did it. It was just offering an even earlier one and putting the decision back on Putin. And this is where the chessboard flipped completely, because if Putin accepted the May 6th offer, he would look like he was following Zelensky's initiative. But if he refused, Ukraine could just resume its drone campaign on May 8th, most importantly May 9th, without looking like the side that rejected the escalation. In other words, Putin was forced to choose between accepting Ukraine's warning or risking the security of the most sacred and symbolic day on his political calendar. All that matters, because authoritarian systems live on the image of control, and once that image cracks even slightly, it becomes dangerous when the ruler is already being told that people around him are watching for an opening. So the ceasefire story is not separate from the bunker story. It is the public version of the very same private fear. And once we see how easily Putin can be cornered from the outside, the next question is why he looks vulnerable on the inside. Now here is the part most people overlook, because when people hear that Putin is isolating himself, they immediately imagine a simple security response, as if the Kremlin just discovered a new threat and decided to protect the president more carefully. But the details suggest something deeper and way more disturbing. The Financial Times' same report we mentioned at the beginning says fewer people are being allowed into meetings. Putin's public appearances have been reduced significantly, his travel routes have been narrowed, and reports about him are being controlled by his security detail. Which means the public is not just seeing less of Putin, even though it is also true. It is also seeing a more filtered version, only the best parts of him. This matches what has been visible from the outside. Since early 2026, his public schedule has been thinner, and he even cancelled his annual address to the Federal Assembly, which is constitutionally expected and used to be one of his biggest yearly meetings with the highest-ranking officials. The last time he publicly addressed that gathering of Russian elites was February 29, 2024, near the end of his previous presidential term. And that is strange, if you think about it, because a ruler who wants to project confidence usually does not skip the stage where the elite is supposed to sit, clap, listen, and demonstrate loyalty. Even the official footage has started telling a story. The video quality, sound quality, camera angles, and editing have all become a little bit too clumsy, almost as if the polished presidential PR machine has been replaced by people whose main job is just security. On March 8, for example, the Kremlin even mixed up footage and reportedly uploaded outtakes onto the presidential official website, which sounds funny until you understand what it actually reveals. Putin is no longer being handled like a political leader performing for the nation, but like a protected asset managed by a security bubble. And the Victory Day Parade, once one of his key public rituals, is expected to be limited to a brief appearance before he disappears once again into the control zone. This is why the question is not whether Putin has enemies, because of course, he does after more than 2 decades in power and more than 4 years of full-scale war, but whether the specific story of an elite plot is the real cause of his isolation. Personally, I'm not convinced that the Russian ruling class is suddenly full of brave conspirators, Because these are the very same people who spend years proving that they can tolerate almost any humiliation as long as they keep part of the status. But a more plausible explanation in this case is that the FSB has found a way to make Putin isolate himself by convincing him that people outside the security services are no longer trustworthy. In that case, in that model, isolation is not just protection, it is the mechanism that creates dependence, because once Putin only hears from the people guarding him, those very same people become the filter through which he experiences the country. And to understand why this works so well, we need to talk about the oldest trick in the control manual. Let's pause here for a second and focus more, because there is something deeper going on. And it's not unique to Russia, the Kremlin, or even politics in general, because every serious manipulation system in history begins with the very same basic move, which is isolate the target from alternative sources of reality. You see it in scam stories, destructive sects, and cases like Mediazon is reporting on Nis Bondarenko, who allegedly spent months convincing people they were being tracked by the FSB and that his connections could help them leave the country safely. And the principle in all these things is always the same, because a person surrounded by friends, relatives, colleagues, and outside information can always and will always have a reality check, while a person who only hears from the manipulator can be guided into believing almost anything. If the victim still talks to family, someone can say, "Wait a second, why do you just suddenly decide to sell your apartment?" But if the victim has been convinced that the family, friends, and colleagues are hostile, if they're acting against his best wishes, then the manipulator becomes the only voice left in the room. Now apply that to Putin and magnify it on a presidential scale. How do you make a ruler want to self-isolate? Well, you convince him that the old elite is not just tired, corrupt, or cynical, but that they're actively dangerous. You tell him that ministers are dreaming about a deal with the West, oligarchs are thinking about frozen villas in Saint-Tropez and bank accounts in Europe, political strategists are secretly terrified of public anger, and anyone who warns against internet shutdowns or economic pressure is not giving useful advice, but trying to weaken him before handing him over to the enemies. Once that belief takes hold, every normal piece of feedback becomes suspicious. If someone says people are angry about mobile internet problems, GPS failures, payment disruptions, and trouble contacting elderly parents outside the country, that is no longer a warning about the country itself. It becomes evidence that the messenger wants the war to end. If someone says the economy is struggling, this is not analysis. It's not even economics, that's not science. No, it just becomes defeatism. If someone says the elite is exhausted, that becomes a hint of disloyalty. This is why the reported fear of a drone launched by disgruntled elites matters even if the scenario is hard to verify, because it gives the security services a narrative. They can tell Putin that the world outside their perimeter is full of people who want renormalization, and that renormalization, in their mind, requires him to leave the stage. They can point to high-profile incidents involving Russian military figures in Moscow and say, "Look, the environment is changing, we need to act now, we need to protect you." They can point to former even defense minister Sergei Shoigu as a possible destabilizing factor and make even old loyalists look questionable. They can point to the fact that nobody wants to spend the next 4 years hiding from drones, sanctions, and economic decline, and then turn that frustration into conspiracy map. And once Putin accepts that logic, which apparently looks like he already did, the FSB does not even need to seize the power in some dramatic cinematic scene, because the power shifts quietly when they become the only people he believes. Now here's where most people unfortunately do not see the whole picture, because there is a huge difference between having reasons to resent Putin and having the courage, coordination, and discipline to act against him. The Russian executive class, including cabinet ministers, oligarchs, security council members, and regime beneficiaries, have more reasons than ever to be furious, because Putin has trapped them in a future where money is frozen abroad, property is vulnerable at home, children's opportunities are shrinking, and every promise of a normal exit keeps disappearing. Just think about it. Throughout 2025, the Kremlin kept dangling the idea that a back-channel arrangement with Trump might reopen a path to normal life. Everyone was talking about it, especially in Russia. But by 2026, even naive insiders could see Putin was never even preparing to sign that kind of deal that would return them to the old world. Trump may have lost a chance to present himself as the man who secured a grand peace, and maybe it even bruised his dream and ego of a Nobel Peace Prize. But for the 500 families that own and control Russia, this destroyed their last believable timeline for returning to villas, yachts, foreign schools, and business as usual. The old bargain used to be brutal, but at least it had some kind of rules. If you were part of the system, donated to United Russia Party, funded pro-Kremlin organizations, pressured employees into voting correctly, and did not run abroad early in the war, you expected to be treated as one of their own. Even if you were punished, well, you expected like a VIP version of this punishment. Maybe a forced sale, controlled retirement, comfortable cell for a while, months or two, or maybe even humiliating but survivable deal. And most importantly, you expected your family to remain protected and financially secure. But that rule has been eroding since then. Now people close to the regime can lose property, status, freedom and family security all at once, while wives, children, parents and associates can also be pulled into this pressure. For outsiders, these people are regime functionaries. Inside the system, they are discovering they can become disposable material for the same machine they helped build. The story of Deputy Minister Denis Butsayev shows how unusual real courage is in that environment, because his flight to the US via Belarus and Armenia the day before the tension was a one-of-a-kind outlier. And that tells you everything about the elite psychology. The FSB can apparently be so confident that future targets will wait around for their turn that it does not even need to impose a travel ban every time. These people are angry and scared. They look at Lake Como, Saint-Tropez, frozen accounts, and the possibility of being asked to contribute 100 billion rubles to the war with no guarantee that the rest will not be taken later, and they understand that their world is closing in. But anger does not automatically produce action, because the same people who spent 25 years selecting cowardice as a survival strategy are not suddenly transformed to revolutionaries just because their lives got worse. This is why, unfortunately, I find an organized elite move against Putin unlikely. But the fear itself is very useful to the FSB, because a frightened ruler does not need a real plot to behave as if one already exists. Now this detail changes everything, because if the elite is too afraid to act and Putin is too suspicious to trust them, then the people who gain the most are not billionaires, ministers or political strategists, but the security services, especially the FSB's second directorate and the broader secret police ecosystem that has expanded during the war. And the first person that should come to your mind when you hear Russia's security service, well, that's Putin's former best friend and ex-minister of defense, Sergei Shoigu. 4 years into this disaster, almost everyone else in Russia is worse off. Ordinary people are dealing with mobile internet shutdowns, GPS problems, blocked platforms, and the absurdity of living in a VPN nation where Russians, Chechens, Buryats, rich, poor, parents, kids, urban residents, rural residents, and pretty much everyone in between must bypass restrictions just to simply reach information, just to have some fun, entertainment, just to work and to connect with relatives. The government is spending enormous resources to drag the country backward by 30 years at least, while the society fights white lists, carries cash, hunts for Wi-Fi, and worries whether elderly parents can be reached when something goes wrong. But the FSB is not suffering from this system in the same way. The FSB gains more power, money, authority, and room to interfere in every layer of Russian life. If Putin is told that everyone outside the security perimeter is a possible co-conspirator, then the security perimeter becomes the real government. If political strategists warn that internet shutdowns are creating public anger, the FSB can frame them as trying to weaken the state. If economic officials warn that the war is damaging the business, the FSB, once again, can frame them as dreaming of the French Riviera and reconnection with the West. If someone suggests that taking Kiev is way too unrealistic, that NATO cannot be intimidated forever, that Crimea could become part of a negotiation nightmare, guess what? The FSB, once again, can frame that person as preparing to sell Putin to the International Criminal Court. And because Putin knows how much damage his decisions caused, it becomes easy to make him believe everyone has a reason to betray him. That is the central irony. Putin built a system where fear travels downward, where officials fear phone calls, oligarchs fear case files, generals fear blame, and citizens fear just saying the wrong thing. But fear does not stay in one direction. Eventually it climbs back up the pyramid, and the man at the very top starts asking whether the people under him are loyal or simply waiting for the moment when his exit becomes their rescue plan. At that point, the FSB does not even need to overthrow him. It only needs to interpret the world for him. The FSB decides who enters the room, whose advice is safe, which trips are risky, which reports are allowed, and which familiar faces look questionable now. So the question, who is in charge, becomes less theoretical, because if the secret police decides Putin's fears, schedule, information, and the view of the elite, then the secret police is not just guarding the ruler, it is governing through him. And once that becomes clear, the final lesson is not only about Putin's paranoia, but about the trap every authoritarian leader eventually builds for himself. That is why today's story matters so much, because it shows a regime entering the stage where control and insecurity become the very same thing. The more Putin tries to protect himself, the more dependent he becomes on the people managing his protection. The more he distrusts the elite, the more power shifts toward the FSB, and the more Russia is pushed into isolation, the easier it becomes to convince the ruler that isolation is safety. And maybe the lesson for every dictator is very simple. When you spend years making everyone afraid of you, do not be surprised when one day you wake up surrounded by guards, bunkers, and suspicions, wondering whether the system you built is protecting you or just quietly owning your own life. Guys, if you want more deep breakdowns like this, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Thanks so much Ground News for once again sponsoring this video. Thanks so much for watching, the links are down below. See you on Monday.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims are all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.